Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in correction block Gamma had the metallic taste of recycled oxygen and quiet desperation. Cale knew the flavor well. It had been the taste of his life for the last 7 standard years, a constant coating on his tongue that no amount of ration pack water could wash away. He stood at the observation portal, his reflection a ghost superimposed over the sterile, white-walled corridor beyond. The face that stared back was a map of old campaigns and older regrets, etched with lines that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with mileage. His uniform, a severe gray tunic of the authority, was immaculate, a stark contrast to the weariness in his eyes. He was a warden, third class, a glorified key-turner on Tartarus 6, a moonlet so far out on the fringe it was less a place and more a final destination. His shift was a study in monotony. The rhythmic clang of mag boots on the grated floor, the low hum of the life support systems, the distant, muffled shouts of inmates who still had the energy to rage against their cages. Cale had long since tuned it all out. He operated on a code of survival honed in the corporate wars that had chewed up his youth and spat him out into this quiet purgatory. Do the job. Keep your head down. Collect the credits. Don't get involved. It was a simple creed, and it had kept him alive. A chime, soft but insistent, broke the stillness of his observation post. A new directive blinked on his console screen, the crisp, impersonal text a harbinger of disruption. He tapped the screen with a gloved finger, his expression unchanging. Transfer. High security. Specimen 734. Destination, sublevel Omega. His new assignment. A flicker of something cold stirred in his gut. Omega was not a cell block. It was a laboratory, a containment vault for things the authority didn't classify as people. Things that were either too valuable to terminate or too dangerous to keep anywhere else. He keyed in his acknowledgement, and the heavy plasteel door to his post slid open with a hiss of compressed air. The walk to the transport bay was a familiar journey through the prison's sterile guts. The walls were polished to a mirror sheen, designed to reflect everything and reveal nothing. Guards in identical gray uniforms nodded curtly as he passed, their faces impassive masks. They were all cogs in the same great, grinding machine, and none of them cared to look too closely at the others. In the transport bay, the atmosphere was different. Tense. A squad of enforcers in heavy carapaced armor stood in a tight perimeter around a hovering containment unit. Their pulse rifles were held at the ready, muzzles pointed at the opaque stasis field of the cubic crate. Proctor Silas, the facility's chief administrator, stood nearby, his face a grim study in concentration. He was a man carved from granite and protocol, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He turned as Cale approached. "Warden," Silas said, his voice a low gravel. "Your assignment." He gestured to the containment unit. "Specimen 734. Your responsibility from this point until it is secured in Omega." Cale gave a curt nod. "What is it?" "Classified," Silas replied without hesitation. "Your clearance gives you access to its containment protocols, nothing more. It is to be considered extremely hostile. Non-sentient. Do not attempt communication. Do not deviate from the energy field parameters. Is that understood?" "Understood, Proctor." It was always classified. The authority thrived on secrets. Cale didn't care about the details. He just wanted the shift to end. He synced his personal datapad with the unit's controls, the technical readouts scrolling across his screen. Power levels, field integrity, biosignatures. The life signs within were erratic, spiking and dipping like a broken heart monitor. Whatever was inside, it was not calm. The journey to sublevel Omega was a descent into the moon's cold heart. The lifts carried them down through layers of rock and reinforced ferrocrete, the temperature dropping with each level. Omega was a place of chilling silence. The air was frigid, sterilized to a degree that felt actively hostile to life. Here, there were no inmates to shout. There were only specimens in their sterile tombs. The containment chamber was a circular room, its walls lined with an array of emitters that hummed with restrained power. In the center was a platform, onto which the transport unit was magnetically locked. Cale supervised the enforcers as they connected the chamber's power conduits to the crate. His job was simple: oversee the transfer, activate the permanent field, and then stand watch for 12 hours. With the connection secure, Silas gave the order. Activate the chamber field. Disengage the transport stasis. Kale's fingers moved over the console, the commands flowing from muscle memory. He initiated the sequence. The emitters on the walls glowed with a pale blue light, weaving a cage of pure energy around the central platform. A low thrum vibrated through the floor. With a final command, he dropped the field on the transport crate. The opaque walls dissolved into transparency, and he saw it for the first time. It was not the beast he had expected. It was a creature, female in form, but utterly alien. Her skin was a pale, almost luminous white, traced with faint, silvery patterns that seemed to shift like liquid mercury. She was tall and slender, her limbs long and graceful, ending in hands with too many fingers. She had no hair. Instead, a crest of delicate, crystalline spines ran down her skull and back. Her face was elegant and sharp, with large, dark eyes that held a fathomless depth. She was bound to the platform by humming energy restraints, her head bowed. She was also clearly in distress. A faint, high-frequency keen emanated from her, a sound that scraped at the edge of human hearing and settled deep in the bone. The biosignature readings on his console were a chaotic frenzy. Jorik, the Enforcer Lieutenant, stepped forward, his armored form a brutalist sculpture of black plate and glowing red optics. Vitals are unstable, Proctor. The transfer must have stressed it. He lifted his pulse rifle. A sedative shock might be in order. Hold, Silas commanded. Let it acclimate. Kale watched the creature. Lyra, a name that surfaced in his mind from some forgotten myth. It suited her more than specimen 734. He saw the slight tremor in her limbs, the way the energy cuffs sparked against her pale skin, leaving angry red marks. The containment field parameters were set to maximum, a painful, agitating frequency designed for suppression. Standard procedure for an unknown. But she wasn't thrashing or fighting. She was enduring. He saw a flicker of something in her dark eyes as she lifted her head, a glimmer of intelligence, of awareness. Not a mindless beast. The others left. Silas, then the enforcers, their heavy boots echoing until they were gone. The heavy door to the chamber slid shut, and Kale was alone with his charge. For hours, he stood his post, watching her. The high-pitched keen continued, a constant needle of sound that pricked at his conscience. His console showed her vital signs worsening, her system struggling against the suppressive field. Protocol was clear: do not interfere. Report anomalies. Wait for instruction. But the creed that had kept him safe for so long felt brittle in the humming silence of that room. He looked from the suffering creature to the cold, impersonal directives on his screen. He thought of the corporate wars, of following orders that led to scorched villages and empty eyes. He had been a good soldier then, a good cog. He had kept his head down. He looked at her again. Her dark eyes met his across the chamber. There was no plea in them, only a profound and weary agony. On an impulse he could not explain, an act of quiet defiance against the machine he served, Kale reached for the console. His fingers hovered over the controls for the containment field. A single, minor adjustment. He lowered the field's frequency by a fraction, shifting it from suppression to simple containment. It was a tiny breach of protocol, one that would be logged but likely overlooked as a system fluctuation. The effect was immediate. The high-pitched keen ceased. The violent tremors running through her body subsided. The chaotic spikes on his biomonitor smoothed into a slow, steady rhythm. She lifted her head, her movements less strained, and looked directly at him. Her gaze was no longer just a look, it was a connection. A wave of silent, crystalline thought washed over him. Not words, but feelings. Gratitude. Surprise. A question. Kale felt a jolt, as if he had touched a live wire. He stumbled back from the console, his heart pounding. What had he done? He had broken the first and most important rule: don't get involved. Before he could process the silent contact, a klaxon blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, painting the sterile white walls in strokes of blood. On his console, a new message overrode everything else, blinking in stark, brutal capitals: containment breach. Omega level. The energy field around her flickered violently. The door to the chamber, which should have been locked down, sparked and slid open. He had not caused the breach. His small act of kindness had merely calmed her enough that when the system-wide failure struck, a deliberate sabotage, he would later realize. She was coherent enough to exploit it. She rose from the platform, the energy cuffs shattering like glass. Power radiated from her, a visible shimmer in the cold air. She took a step, then another, her movements fluid and impossibly fast. She was not moving toward him with aggression, but toward the open door, toward freedom. He stood frozen for a second, the klaxon screaming in his ears. He could raise his sidearm. He could try to stop her. It was his duty. But all he could see were her eyes, filled not with malice, but with a desperate will to live. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Jorik and his squad. Seal the chamber. The lieutenant's voice boomed over the comms. Shoot to kill. Kale made a choice. The old creed died in the silent cold of Omega. He turned and ran, not away from her, but with her. He burst through the doorway just ahead of her, his pulse pistol already in his hand. This way, he yelled, not knowing if she understood his words, but hoping she understood his intent. He was no longer a warden. He was an accomplice. The escape had begun. The corridors of Tartarus 6 became a blur of gray and flashing red. Kale moved with the grim efficiency of his past life, his mind a cold calculator of angles and choke points. Behind him, he could feel her presence, a silent, swift shadow that kept pace effortlessly. The authorities' response was immediate and overwhelming. Lockdown shutters slammed down, trying to box them in. Sentry turrets descended from the ceiling, their targeting lasers painting a deadly web across the hallways. He fired 2 precise shots, shattering the optical sensors of the nearest turret before it could acquire a lock. He ducked behind a support column as another opened fire, rounds of superheated plasma scoring the wall where he had been standing. He was outgunned, a man with a pistol against an automated fortress. But he was not alone. The creature, Lyra, moved past him. She raised a slender hand, and a ripple of force, visible as a distortion in the air, erupted from her palm. The second turret imploded, torn apart by a power he could not comprehend. She didn't look back, simply continued down the corridor, her movements a disorienting blend of grace and lethality. He saw then that the authority had not imprisoned a beast, they had caged a storm. They were forced deeper into the service levels of the prison, a maze of maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts that Kale knew from years of thankless patrols. It was a dark, grimy underworld, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the upper decks. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and lubricant. Here, they were on more equal footing. The authorities' heavy troops couldn't maneuver as easily. Distrust was a palpable thing between them. He was a warden, one of her captors. She was an unknown power, an entity that could have killed him in an instant. Yet, they moved together, a partnership born of pure necessity. He would point the way, using his knowledge of the facility's layout, and she would clear the path, her strange abilities disabling security systems and armored patrols with an almost casual ease. He watched her, trying to understand what she was. Her power was immense, but she seemed to wield it with reluctance, only using what was necessary to proceed. He also saw her fatigue. Each use of her abilities left her paler, the silvery patterns on her skin seeming to dim. She was powerful, but she was not invincible. They found a temporary refuge in a decommissioned power conduit junction, a dark, cavernous space filled with the silent skeletons of old machinery. The sounds of the hunt were more distant here. Kale leaned against a cold metal wall, his breath ragged, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. He had a deep gash on his forearm from a ricocheting piece of shrapnel. It bled sluggishly, soaking the sleeve of his uniform. Lyra watched him from the shadows, her large, dark eyes glowing faintly. She took a hesitant step closer. He instinctively tensed, his hand moving toward his sidearm. She paused, sensing his fear. Then, slowly, she knelt and extended a hand, palm up. It was an offering, a gesture of peace. He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to the ground, his wounded arm held stiffly. She moved closer, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She reached out with one of her long-fingered hands and gently touched the edge of his wound. Her touch was cool, like polished stone. A soft, silvery light emanated from her fingertips, flowing over his skin. The pain vanished instantly. He watched, astonished, as the torn flesh knitted itself together, The bleeding stopped, and within seconds, only a faint, pink line remained where the deep cut had been. She drew her hand back, the light fading. She looked tired, the effort having cost her. She had healed him, an inmate healing her jailer. The act went beyond simple necessity. It was a choice, a statement. The comm unit on his belt crackled to life. It was Jorik's voice, distorted and full of cold fury. Warden Kale, you have committed treason of the highest order. Surrender the asset and yourself. Your cooperation will be noted. Kale knew what that meant. A quick interrogation, followed by a quiet execution. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him, her head tilted in a curious gesture. In that moment, the bond between them solidified. It was no longer just about survival. He had saved her from Jorik's rifle, and she had just saved him from a debilitating wound. They were bound by acts of mutual protection. He reached down and unclipped the comm unit from his belt. He crushed it under the heel of his boot, the crunch of plastic and electronics, a final, definitive severing of his old life. He looked up at her and gave a single, determined nod. They had to get out. Not just out of the prison, but off this rock entirely. They had to escape Tartarus. The only way off-world was through the primary shuttle bay, a heavily fortified installation on the moon's surface. Getting there meant navigating the rest of the prison and then crossing a stretch of the exposed, hostile landscape. They set out again, moving through the forgotten arteries of the station. The journey was a shared ordeal that stripped away the last vestiges of their former roles. They were no longer warden and specimen. They were two fugitives fighting for their lives against a common enemy. The moon's surface was a vision of desolation. They emerged from a maintenance hatch into a landscape of gray dust and jagged black rock, under a sky choked with thick, ochre clouds. The primary star of the system was a dim, hazy disk, casting a weak, sickly light. A thin, toxic atmosphere required breathers, but Lyra seemed unaffected, drawing in the acrid air as if it were clean and sweet. The cold was biting, a physical presence that seeped through Kale's uniform and chilled him to the core. They moved through this wasteland, the prison complex a monolithic scar on the horizon behind them. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of Kale's boots on the gravelly soil and the whisper of the wind that carried dust as fine as powdered glass. Pursuers were inevitable. Skimmers would be launched, patrols dispatched. Their only cover was the treacherous terrain, a maze of canyons and rock formations carved by ancient, long-dead winds. During this journey, communication between them evolved. She did not speak with a voice, but with images, feelings, impressions that bloomed directly in his mind. It was jarring at first, an intimate and profound violation of his own solitude. But as they traveled, he grew accustomed to the silent flow of information. He learned that her people were called the Signian, and this moon, which the authority called Tartarus 6, had a name in her language, Alara, the world that sings. She showed him visions, a world teeming with life, not on its surface, but within its crystalline core. A collective consciousness, a gestalt entity where her people lived in a state of symbiotic harmony with the planet itself. They were not individuals in the human sense, but facets of a greater whole, their thoughts and life force intertwined with the geological rhythms of Alara. It was a world of light and sound and resonance, a world that sang. Then the visions turned dark. She showed him the arrival of the authorities' survey ships, great metal beasts that tore into the moon's crust. She showed him the mining operations, the massive drills that plunged into the planet's heart, fracturing the crystalline network, silencing the song. It was not just mining. It was torture, a lobotomy performed on a planetary scale. The authorities saw the energy readings, the unique geological properties, and coveted them. They had no concept of the life they were destroying. Her people had tried to fight back. They had manifested on the surface, their forms coalescing from the moon's own substance, their powers a defense mechanism of a dying world. The authority had branded them monsters, hostile xenoforms. They brought in soldiers. Kale saw flashes of battles, of pulse rifles firing on beings of light, of his own gray uniform on the men pulling the triggers. It was a war he had not fought in, but it was the same war, the same corporate machine of conquest he had served his entire adult life. The final vision was the most painful. She showed him Warden Voss, younger then, directing the final assault. Voss had orchestrated the pacification, capturing the surviving Sigmian, Lyra among them, to be studied, to have their energy harnessed as a power source. He was the architect of her people's demise, the man who had silenced the song of Alara and built his prison on its corpse. This was not just an escape. For her, it was a quest to reclaim a stolen world. For Kale, it was a chance at redemption. One evening, as they sheltered in a shallow cave from a dust storm that scoured the land with hypersonic winds, the shared trauma of their past surfaced. Kale was cleaning his pistol, the familiar, methodical action a small comfort in the vast emptiness. His hand brushed against a jagged scar that ran along his ribs, a relic from a shrapnel wound sustained on Cygnus X-1. The memory associated with it flared, a sudden, vivid flashback of fire and screaming, of a command he had followed that had resulted in the deaths of his entire platoon. Lyra, sitting silently nearby, flinched. She felt the echo of his pain, the psychic residue of his trauma. She reached out, not with her hand, but with her mind, and gently touched the raw edges of his memory. She did not try to heal it, but simply acknowledged it, sharing its weight. In return, she lowered the psychic shields that had guarded her own deepest sorrow. He saw through her eyes the moment of her capture. The chaos, the fear, the profound, wrenching agony of being severed from the collective consciousness of Alara. It was like having her soul torn from her body. The silence that followed was a living thing, a crushing void that had been her constant companion in the sterile cell of Omega. He saw the cold, clinical curiosity in Voss's eyes as he studied her, a being of immense power and beauty reduced to a specimen number on a datapad. In that cave, surrounded by the howling wind, two broken soldiers from opposing sides of a forgotten war found a common ground in their scars. He was a man who had lost his purpose, and she was a being who had lost her world. Both had been maimed by the same unfeeling system. The bond between them was no longer just about survival or even mutual protection. It was a deep, shared understanding forged in pain. They were spotted the next day. A high-speed reconnaissance skimmer crested a ridge, its optical sensors glinting in the dim light. Before Kale could even raise his pistol, the alarm was sounded. Within minutes, the sky was filled with the wasp-like whine of troop carriers. Jork had found them. The battle was brutal and swift. They were cornered in a narrow canyon, the walls of black rock offering the only cover. Enforcers in their heavy armor descended on repulsor lifts, laying down a punishing barrage of fire. Kale fought with a desperate ferocity, his shots precise, aimed at the vulnerable joints of the enemy armor. He was a good soldier, and the muscle memory of combat was a terrible, familiar comfort. But it was Lyra who turned the tide. She stood her ground, a slender figure of white against the black rock, and unleashed her power. The ground buckled, throwing the advancing enforcers off balance. Spikes of crystalline rock erupted from the canyon floor, impaling troop carriers. She wove shields of pure force that deflected plasma bolts, her movements a deadly dance. Kale saw the cost of this display. With each attack, her form seemed to become more translucent, the light within her dimming. Jork descended himself, his armor heavier, marked with the insignia of his command rank. He ignored the other soldiers, his glowing red optics fixed solely on Kale. "Traitor!" he roared, his voice amplified into a metallic snarl. He opened fire, not with a standard pulse rifle, but with a heavy concussion cannon. Kale shoved Lyra behind a rock outcropping an instant before the blast hit. The concussion wave threw him against the canyon wall, the impact stealing the air from his lungs and blurring his vision. His pistol clattered from his numb fingers. Jork advanced, the cannon whining as it recharged. This was it. He was out of options. But as Jork raised his weapon for the final shot, Lyra moved. She placed herself between Kale and the enforcer, her hands raised. She wasn't attacking. She was offering herself. "The asset is to be taken alive, Lieutenant." Kale managed to gasp, remembering the directive. "Voss wants her." Jork hesitated, his fanaticism warring with his orders. That moment of hesitation was all Kale needed. He launched himself forward, grabbing a jagged piece of rock and driving it into the exposed cabling at the back of Jork's knee joint. The armored leg buckled. As Jork stumbled, Kale retrieved his pistol and fired a single, precise shot into the lieutenant's helmet optics. The red glow died, and the armored suit crashed to the ground, inert. The remaining enforcers, their commander faltered. Lyra seized the opportunity, sending out a powerful wave of psychic dissonance. The enforcers clutched their helmets, disoriented and confused, their comms flooded with static. It gave Kale and Lyra the chance to escape, disappearing deeper into the labyrinthine canyons. They had won the battle, but the encounter had made one thing terrifyingly clear. They could not win this war. Voss had a private army, a fleet in orbit. He could scour the entire surface of the moon if he had to. They could run, they could hide, but they could not defeat him through force. As they found a new place to rest, the weight of their impossible situation settled over them. Kale knew that even if they managed to steal a shuttle and escape, Voss would hunt them to the ends of the galaxy. He wanted his prize, and he wanted to bury his secrets. It was then, in the exhausted silence after the battle, that Lyra revealed the final, terrible truth. She projected the image into his mind with a clarity that was both beautiful and horrifying. She showed him the heart of Alara, a vast, subterranean nexus of living crystal directly beneath the prison. It was the core of her people's consciousness, the source of their song. It was damaged, fractured by the authorities' drills, but it was not dead. She explained that she could reconnect with it. She could pour her own life force back into the nexus, reawakening the planetary consciousness. The reawakening would be a cataclysmic event, a wave of pure energy that would not only disable every piece of authority technology on and around the moon, but would also begin the long, slow process of healing Alara. It would be a final, definitive act of liberation. But there was a flaw. The nexus was too unstable. Her energy alone, released so suddenly, would be uncontrolled. The resulting energy wave would not just disable technology, it would shatter the moon's crust, destroying everything. The prison, the land, and her, all at once. The song would return, but only as a death cry. There was a way to prevent this, a way to regulate the flow, to temper the raw power into something controlled and precise. The nexus needed a bridge, a filter, a consciousness that was both organic and individual, something alien to the Signian gestalt, to act as a governor. A human mind, with its singular focus and structure, could serve that purpose. But the mind that became the bridge would be consumed. Their consciousness would be dissolved, their identity subsumed into the planetary network, spread thin across the entire moon. They would not die, but they would cease to be themselves. They would become a silent, eternal guardian, a living part of the world's song. It was a solution, but one that required the ultimate sacrifice. The weight of her revelation settled upon Kale, heavier than the thin, toxic atmosphere. He looked out from their hiding place at the desolate landscape of Alara, a world bled dry of its life and voice. He thought of his own life, a hollow sequence of following orders, collecting pay, and trying to forget the past. It was a life of quiet desperation, a long, slow march toward a meaningless end. What had it been for? What had he ever fought for that truly mattered? He had followed the authorities' orders and lost his soul. He had followed his own code of survival and found only loneliness. Here, with this strange, silent creature, he had broken every rule he had ever lived by. He had protected her, and she had protected him. He had felt a connection, a sense of purpose he had not known since before the wars had scoured it out of him. The choice was not really a choice at all. It was an inevitability, the final, logical endpoint of the path he had started on when he adjusted that energy field. He could try to run, to drag Lyra with him in a desperate, doomed flight across the stars, always looking over his shoulder. Or he could stand his ground, make a final, meaningful stand, and give his empty life a purpose that would echo long after he was gone. He could help bring the song back to this world. He sat in the dim light, the silence stretching between them. He felt her watching him, her mind a quiet presence, waiting. She had presented the solution, but she was not asking him to take it. The choice had to be his. He thought of the faces of the men he had failed to save, the cost of his obedience. He thought of the cold, dead feeling in his chest that had been his only companion for years. He looked at Lyra, at the hope and sorrow mingled in her deep, dark eyes. The internal debate was a silent one, waged not with words, but with the accumulated weight of a lifetime of regrets. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It was the calm of a soldier who has finally received his last, true order. He was done running. He turned to Lyra. He didn't have her ability to project thoughts, and words felt inadequate, clumsy. Instead, he simply met her gaze and nodded once. A slow, deliberate motion. An acceptance. An answer. A wave of profound sorrow washed over him from her. A grief so pure and deep it almost brought him to his knees. But beneath it, there was a current of immense, unwavering respect. She understood. She lowered her head in a gesture of solemn acknowledgement. There was nothing more to say. They had a plan. They had to go back. The journey back to the prison was a grim pilgrimage. They moved with a singular, unified purpose, no longer fugitives, but avengers. The final confrontation had to take place at the source, in the heart of the facility where Voss had built his monument to conquest, directly atop the wounded heart of Alara. This meant returning to sublevel Omega, to the containment chamber where it had all begun. They used the authorities' own tactics against them, creating diversions, striking from the shadows, turning the prison's automated systems into weapons against their masters. Kale's knowledge of the facility and Lyra's power were a devastating combination. They moved like ghosts through the station, the alarms always one step behind them. As they descended deeper, the resistance stiffened. Voss knew where they were going. He had pulled his remaining forces back, creating a series of deadly choke points around Omega. The final levels were a gauntlet of plasma fire and armored soldiers. The fighting was close and visceral. Kale's uniform was torn and scorched, his body a canvas of new bruises, but he moved with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just surviving. He was fighting for something. They reached the final corridor leading to the Omega chamber. It was eerily quiet. The door at the far end was open. Kale knew it was a trap. Standing in the center of the chamber, bathed in the cold blue light of the powered-down containment field, was Warden Voss. He was not wearing armor, only his immaculate proctor's uniform. He held a small, silver device in his hand. "Warden Kale," Voss said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "I must admit, I am disappointed. I thought you were a professional." "I was," Kale replied, his pistol held steady. "Then I saw what you were keeping in your basement." Voss smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "A power source. A key to unlocking the future of the authority. You see a monster, I see progress. And you have brought it right back to me." He gestured with the device. "This is a neural scrambler. A failsafe. One press, and your companion's mind will be reduced to that of a simple animal. She will be powerful, but compliant. All of this trouble could have been avoided." Suddenly, a shape detached from the shadows near the ceiling. Jorik. His armor was scarred and damaged, one optical sensor dark, but he was functional. He dropped to the ground behind them, cutting off their retreat, his concussion cannon aimed squarely at Kale. His survival was an unexpected and deadly complication. "Drop your weapon, traitor," Jorik snarled. The standoff was absolute. Voss had the scrambler. Jorik had the cannon. It was over. But Lyra had one last gambit. She sent a single, powerful thought to Kale. The Nexus. Now. She erupted in a blinding flash of silver light. The entire chamber was illuminated as if by a miniature sun. Voss and Jorik cried out, momentarily blinded. It was the opening Kale needed. He didn't fire at Voss. He fired at the ceiling. A power conduit, sparking and overloaded by Lyra's energy burst, exploded, showering the room in debris. Jorik, recovering his sight, fired his cannon, but his aim was wild. The blast went wide, striking the main console and blowing it apart. Kale ignored him and sprinted for the central platform. This was the spot, the epicenter. Beneath this metal plate was the most direct connection to the moon's core. Lyra engaged Voss, her form a blur of white. The neural scrambler fired, but she was too fast, the beam searing a black line on the wall behind her. She disarmed him with a flick of her wrist, sending the device skittering across the floor. Jorik, enraged, turned his cannon on her. "No," he screamed, firing again. Kale reached the platform. He placed his hands on the cold metal surface. He closed his eyes and focused, reaching out with his mind, just as she had taught him in their brief time together. He opened himself up to the world beneath his feet. A bolt of energy, raw and overwhelming, shot up from the floor, engulfing him. The pain was absolute, a fire that consumed every nerve in his body. His own consciousness felt like a single drop of water falling into an infinite ocean. He saw everything. He saw the birth of the moon from cosmic dust. He saw the first stirrings of the Cygnian consciousness, a symphony of light and crystal. He saw the arrival of the authority, the drills like daggers, the silence they left in their wake. He felt the moon's pain as his own. His identity, the man named Kale, began to fray at the edges, his memories dissolving into the vast, ancient consciousness of Alara. He saw his own life flash before him, the wars, the prison, the moment he met Lyra. He clung to that last memory, the image of her eyes, and used it as an anchor, a focal point to channel the cataclysmic power flowing through him. He became the bridge. He became the governor. He began to sing the song. In the chamber, Jorik's final shot never landed. As Lyra stood before him, a wave of gentle, silent energy emanated from the platform where Kale stood, now wreathed in a soft, golden light. The concussion cannon in Jorik's hands simply powered down. The lights on his armor flickered and died. Across the room, Voss stared in disbelief as the entire chamber went dark, the only illumination coming from the glowing form of the man he had once commanded. The wave expanded. It swept through the prison, silent and irresistible. Every weapon, every security system, every computer console went inert. The lights failed, plunging the facility into a profound darkness, broken only by the emergency chem lights that flickered to life. On the surface, the authorities' tanks and skimmers stalled, becoming useless statues of metal. In orbit, the bridge of Voss's command ship went dead, the view screen showing the moon below now glowing with a faint, internal luminescence. The sterilization sequence, moments from activation, failed. The war was over. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A song. Voss sank to his knees, his power, his ambition, his entire world rendered inert in a single, silent moment. Lyra walked to the platform and looked at the softly glowing energy field that now encased the spot where Kale had been. His physical body was gone, consumed in the transformation. But she could feel him. He was not dead. He was everywhere. He was the gentle hum in the rock, the light that now shone from the moon. He was the quiet guardian, his consciousness the steadying hand that tempered the planet's awesome power. He had made his sacrifice. He had brought back the song. 10 years passed. The moon known as Tartarus 6 was gone from the authorities' star charts, replaced by its true name, Alara. It was now a protected sanctuary, a testament to the authorities' collapse, which had begun that day when an entire sector fleet was neutralized without a single shot fired. The story of this silent moon had spread, unraveling the authorities' web of secrets and lies, sparking rebellions that eventually brought the corrupt regime to its knees. A new order had taken its place, one built on cooperation and understanding. Small scientific and diplomatic outposts were now permitted on Alara, their inhabitants coexisting peacefully with the Cygnian, who had slowly begun to manifest on the surface once more. They were beings of grace and light, their song a constant, gentle thrum that resonated in the very air of the reborn world. The world was at peace, a quiet, enduring peace bought at a profound cost. At the heart of the old, decommissioned prison, the Omega Chamber had been transformed. It was no longer a cage, but a shrine. The walls had been taken down, opening it to the sky, where the unfamiliar light of a bluer, healthier sun shone down. In the center, the platform remained, but it now pulsed with a soft, steady, golden light. Lyra stood before it. She was no longer a specimen, but a leader, an ambassador for her people. She reached out and placed a hand on the edge of the platform, the light warming her skin. She closed her eyes and could feel him. Kale. His consciousness was vast, serene, intertwined with the life of the planet. He was the bedrock, the wind, the soft light that bathed the canyons. He was the silent guardian, his sacrifice a permanent, living memorial. He was no longer the man she had known, his individual self lost to the whole, but he was at peace. His life had been given a meaning that would last for eternity. An old man in a simple civilian robe walked up beside her. It was Silas. He had been one of the first to testify against the authority, his grim professionalism finally finding a worthy cause. He visited Alara once a year, every year. He looked at the golden light, his weathered face filled with a somber respect. He was a good soldier, Silas said, his voice quiet. Lyra did not answer with words. She sent him a feeling, a single, pure note of the moon's song. It was a note of sorrow, of gratitude, and of a peace that passed all understanding. His sacrifice was not forgotten. It was the foundation of their new world. And in the heart of the singing planet, the jaded warden who had dared to show a moment of kindness stood his final, eternal watch.